Oh boy, I have taken my sweet time with this series. Apologies if this is your favourite of my retrospective series, as I really need to prioritise these videos more. Anyway, let's dive into the game which this series' name is derived from, as I look back on 2012 Project Cross Zone for the Nintendo 3DS. Now just a reminder that videos like these are brought to you by my lovely patrons like Cameron Strauss and newcomer Cool Cookie. For as little as $3 a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, link in the description below. Following the release of Exceed, no I'm not going to say the full name, Sorichiro Morozumi and his team at Monolthsoft were done with the Super Robot franchise and were keen to look to their next project. One such idea raised was to go back to where it began and create a new crossover game like Namco x Capcom. In fact, Morozumi's team wasn't the only one interested in making a new Namco x Capcom. Around the year 2010, Bandai Namco producer Kensuke Tsukanaka had gotten into talks with Capcom about developing a new crossover. While quite the novel concept back in 2005, by 2010 crossovers were quickly becoming all of the rage, with the Super Smash Bros. Series making strong sales, while huge hype was developing for Marvel's upcoming Avengers movie. Thus Bandai Namco was really keen to get back into the action of crossovers. Wanting to make this new crossover bigger than ever, Tsukanaka would not only approach Capcom, but Sega too, who, like the other two, had a history of crossover games. Thus, with 3 studios now involved, Tsukanaka would now only need a developer, and Morozumi seemed like the obvious choice, despite the fact that Monolthsoft was now owned by Nintendo. And thus work began on what would effectively be Namco x Capcom x Sega. Now obviously such a title wouldn't work for the game, however the team really liked the cross used in the original game's title. Thus the name Project Cross Zone soon came out as the ideal name for the game, with it being a collaborative project between 3 publishers whose video game worlds, or zones, would be crossing over with one another. Alongside the game's name, the team also needed a system to release the game on, and the 3DS soon came up as the desired platform. Obviously, with Monolthsoft now owned by Nintendo, a PlayStation release was off the table. Meanwhile, the team's experience on Nintendo's previous DS console made the 3DS the obvious choice. The system also having comparable power to the PS2 would allow the team to make this game in a similar 2D sprite presentation as the original Namco x Capcom. Speaking about the presentation, Morozumi's team wanted to spice up the combat animations with flashier attacks as seen in the Endless Frontier games. This would require much more sprites for each character, and with the game now featuring characters from 3 different studios, the task of developing the game became very challenging. Despite the challenges, the team would successfully complete the game in time for a release on the 11th of October 2012. From the poor sale of Endless Frontier in America, combined with the fact that the original Namco x Capcom hadn't released in the West, Bandai Namco made no intentions to localize Project Cross Zone. However, a few weeks before the game's Japanese release, Tekken producer Katsuhiro Harada would express on Twitter his interest to see the game reach Western shores. While not confirmed, this move likely motivated Bandai Namco to localize the game to America on the 25th of June 2013 and then release it 2 weeks later in PAL territories. Now around a year and a half later, I would learn about the game following the announcement of the game's sequel. Interested in this unique concept of a game, I would download the first Project Cross Zone game to my 3DS, eager to try this game out for myself. So allow me to reminisce about my first experience with a Project Cross Zone game as I talk about this game's story. Like all the previous games in this series, Project Cross Zone begins with a slideshow introducing us to the state of the world. The video goes over the many parallel worlds which run alongside our own, and how dark forces are scheming from these parallel worlds. We then jump to the estate of one Mii Ryuji, whose family heirloom, the Portal Stone, has recently been stolen. To help her out, Mii calls in Detective Kogoro Tenzai, who also happens to be Mii's martial arts teacher. Kogoro arrives late to Mii's estate, much to her annoyance, however Kogoro doesn't seem to care. While the two begin chatting about the stolen Portal Stone, several monsters suddenly show up at the estate. Identifying them as the culprits that stole the stone, Mii and Kogoro engage them in combat. Defeating all of them, the two wondered why they bothered coming back. And with that, Mii and Kogoro head off on an adventure across time and space as they run into characters both familiar and unfamiliar as they attempt to find out who stole the Portal Stone and for what purpose. And with that, the story continues, and you know how you can watch the rest. Presentation wise, Project Cross Zone shares quite a lot with the previous Namco across Capcom. Once again, we're back to the SRPG style of gameplay, in which you need to clear out maps full of enemies across a bunch of familiar locations from the many different Namco, Capcom and Sega games. Just like in Namco cross Capcom, the maps will be in full 3D while the characters remain as 2D sprites. Project Cross Zone takes place over 5 prologue chapters and 41 regular chapters. Before each chapter, you have the opportunity to mess around with the characters and equipment as well as enter a training area. Meanwhile, throughout these chapters, the protagonists of Mi and Kogoro will travel around the multiverses and recruit a whole bunch of classic video game characters as Mi tracks down the mysterious organisation which stole her family heirloom. Like last time, we also have a bunch of subplots which take place alongside the main narrative, with most involving the heroes having to rematch their nemesis from past games. Unlike last time, in which characters appear on the map as pairs and solo fighters, this time only the pair units are on the map, with solo units instead being partnered up with the paired characters to be called in for battle assists. We were talking about the characters. With 7 years passing since the release of Namco cross Capcom, there has been a massive overhaul to keep the character list relevant to the current state of the video game market. On the Namco side, Reggie and Zaimu return from the previous crossover games alongside Saya's solo unit. Shion and Momo have been dropped and instead replaced by Tello, who now fights with Cosmos as a pair. King and Armored King have been replaced by Lin, who pairs up with Jin, as well as Alyssa, who fights as a solo unit alongside Heihachi. The Tales of Destiny cast has been completely dropped and replaced by Yuri, Estelle and Flynn from Tales of Vesperia. Valkyrie is now the solo representative of her series. Meanwhile, the other series have been completely dropped, and instead we now have a bunch of new series representatives such as Kite and Black Rose from the Dot Hack series, Soma, Alicia and Lindo from God Eater, Naneko/Nato from Numeria, Sanja from the Super Robot Original Generation games, and we even have Haken and Kaguya joining us from the Endless Frontier games. Now as for the changes on the Capcom side, only Ryu, Ken and Chun-Li return from the Street Fighter franchise, however they're now joined by newcomer Juri. The Darkstalkers, Morrigan, Dimitri and Heisenko also return, although interestingly all are paired up with different Capcom characters. Tronbon returns from Mega Man Legend, however as for Mega Man himself we now have X who is paired up with his partner Zero. Batsu is now Rival School's representative. The way more recognisable Chris and Jill now represent the Resident Evil games, and finally Arthur returns from Ghosts and Goblins. As for brand new Capcom reps, we now have Dante and Lady from Devil May Cry, Frank West from Dead Rising, and Princess Divelote from Cyberbots. Finally, we also have the brand new Sega characters, which include Ichiro, Sakura, Gemini and Erika from Sakura Wars, Akira and Pai from Virtua Fighter, Kurt, Rayla and Imka from Valkyria Chronicles, Zephyr, Leanne and Vashron from Resonance of Fate, Torma and Cyril from Shining Force EXA, Ulala from Space Channel 5, Bruno from Dynamite Cop, Rakia from Zombie Revenge, and finally Barn from Fighting Vipers. Like last time, we once again have a bunch of dialogue both in and between chapters as each of the characters gets their own moment in the spotlight. However, it might just be me, but it does feel like it's toned down a little since Namco cross Capcom, with dialogue feeling a lot quicker, but that could just be me. Keeping on the topic of dialogue, characters now have in-battle quotes. These will usually be quick little one-liners ripped straight from the character's source game. However, if you're lucky, you might possibly get an Easter egg dialogue moment between a pair unit and their partnered solo character. These funny exchanges often get a laugh out of me when I know the characters in their source game. As such, I always like switching around solo units between battles so I can see as many of these funny Easter egg conversations as I possibly can. Like in Namco cross Capcom, characters will once again be given an assigned turn order. However, we no longer have the AP gauge. Instead, every turn, characters and enemies will be given a specific position in the turn to act, with faster characters often getting higher positions. The game will then go through each character until everyone has moved, before beginning the next turn and starting the process all over again. As a result, we no longer have characters making multiple moves a turn, and in general everyone gets a fair amount of action. When it comes to around one of your pair characters' turns, you'll immediately be given control over their movement, with the game forgoing any menus for basic gameplay. Pretty much all movement and attacks can be done without a menu, with the menu only really being used to use items as well as check the battle conditions. Anyway, as I was saying, you can move up to enemies and then use the bumpers to select a specific one before engaging in combat. Once combat does begin, you'll see a relatively similar battle system to those of the previous games in this retrospective series. Once again, you can launch a range of preset combo attacks by pressing the A button along with a direction on the D-pad. Though initially only limited to 3 types of attacks, over the course of the game pair characters will unlock the remaining button combinations. Paired characters also initially only have the ability to unleash as many attacks as they have button combos. However, by performing one of each button combo, they will unlock the ability to perform one additional attack. This does unfortunately incentivize spamming your way through every attack once, and combine this with little difference in the attacks outside of the animations, it does kill a lot of the strategic play of past games. However, that's not to say the game is completely devoid of strategy. By timing attacks to occur just before the enemy hits the ground, it will turn the attack into a critical hit. We can also call in other fighters to assist in cross attacks. During an attack, paired characters can call on both a solo fighter, if they have one equipped, as well as another paired fighter if they were adjacent before the battle began. If two of these characters hit the enemy at the same time, they will trigger a cross hit, resulting in the enemy being locked in place and taking increased damage. As you unleash your combos, you will slowly build up the XP meter. If the meter goes above 100%, you can then unleash the character's special attack, which usually consists of a very flashy extended combo that heavily references their original game. XP can also be used to activate the character's skills, as well as perform multi-attacks, in which the characters can target multiple enemies at once with a slightly weaker special attack. Meanwhile, XP can also be used on the enemy's turn in order to block attacks, as well as allow you to perform counters. Now with the basics of the combat out of the way, let's talk about the game's sound design. Like in Namco x Capcom, the game's soundtrack is mostly made up of tracks from the multiple Source games. However, we thankfully now have a much wider selection of tracks compared to Namco x Capcom. For a start, each pair unit now has 2 tracks which will play at the start of their turn. Meanwhile, if you have a solo unit equipped to the pair unit, you might even get their track to play instead. We also have tracks which play during special attacks, although only me and Reiji's pairs get unique tracks, with the rest of the cast just reusing the climax as their regular pieces. As you can imagine, a lot of these tracks have since gone on to be favourites of mine. I've already mentioned how Battle of Your Soul got me hooked on Xenosaga. However, other tracks like Battle to Pay the Debt and Attack Imperial Assault Troop have equally been pieces that I have fallen in love with. Outside of the classic remix tracks, we also have a bunch of original tracks for the game done by the game's trio of composers, Naofumi Tsuruyama, Takuya Hanoka, and Kayoko Matsushima. Once again, these tracks are good, but nothing exactly special compared to the remix tunes. Heck, I might consider it a downgrade compared to the original tracks from Namco x Capcom, as I find Reggie and Zaimu's themes way more memorable than even the protagonists of me and Kogoro, and this was the case even before I played Namco x Capcom. While the original soundtrack might be a downgrade from Namco x Capcom, one thing I can definitely say is an upgrade is the introduction of more voice acting. While most of the script unfortunately remains voiceless, we now have partial voice acting for several scenes, mostly those of importance, as well as fully voiced pre- and post-battle dialogues. Altogether, even the partial addition of voice acting goes a long way to giving this game more life and energy compared to Namco x Capcom. Speaking about energy, let's talk about the game's somewhat bombastic OP. For the game's opening song, we now have Wing Wanderer performed by Yoku Takahashi, who also performed the game's ending song Galaxy. As for Wing Wanderer, it's an interesting piece. While I like its unique and funky beat, I don't quite feel like the piece has the that the previous Exceed opening did. In fact, I'd go as far to say I think I actually like the English version of this OP better, which replaces the opening song with a similar sounding piece that even has a key change. As for the opening itself, the new opening done by Studio Trigger, yes, that's Studio Trigger, is a nice piece of work. However, it does unfortunately feel like it's entirely made up of character establishing shots, with very little action shots to get excited over. However, I still think it's a solid opening cinematic. As the game which got me into this series, of course Project Cross Zone has a special place in my heart. However, I'm not going to exonerate its flaws because of my nostalgia for this game. A lot of my issues with this game are also the same issues I had with the previous Namco x Capcom. Once again, the game is extremely long due to the sheer number of chapters combined with the plethora of enemies in each chapter that need to be defeated. We also once again have the issue of extremely long dialogue exchanges as each character wants to get a line in. However, Project Cross Zone does at least partially address these issues, as for a start, we now have a few less chapters than Namco x Capcom. Chapters are also a lot quicker thanks to the fact that enemies no longer have attack animations outside of special attacks. I'm also somewhat forgiving of the game's length thanks in part to the fact that it's on the 3DS. You see, a game like Project Cross Zone with its limited cinematic scope and long playtimes suits a handheld way better than a home console. Thanks to the form factor, I was easily able to pick up and play the game in a way I couldn't with Namco x Capcom on the PS2. However, despite the fact that the game is quicker and on a better system, there are also a bunch of issues I have with this game uniquely. While I think the new turn order system is better than the AP gauge of the first game, it does unfortunately have the issue of benefiting fast characters. In a lot of stages I frequently found my fast characters being able to mop up all the enemies before my slow unit could get into the action. I also had a bunch of issues with how the game presents its characters. For a start, solo characters feel kind of inferior to paired characters. Unlike paired characters who get a whole range of attacks, solo characters are limited to a single assist attack. Also, not a huge issue, but I never liked how Mii, for all intents and purposes, is set up as the protagonist, but it's Kogoro who leads the pair unit. While I feel this section has been more complaints than positive comments, I still really enjoyed Project Cross Zone as a game. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't have done an entire retrospective series on these games, and I also would not have become a fan of Tales, Sakura Wars and God Eater. So for all the critiques I give this game, I still think it's something worth trying out. And with that, my review of Project Cross Zone is complete. Now it's time I turn to this game's sequel to see if I can fix the issues I had with the first game and create the ultimate SRPG crossover. So join me next time as we dive into 2015 Project Cross Zone 2 for the Nintendo 3DS.